Service Award. And today is the day that it all pays off. The sleepless nights. The mild extortion. Selling off my precious anime collection.
If you're less exposed to anime than most of the writers and readers for Smash Jump, you might not know that the industry has been overtaken by Isekai in the last decade. An Isekai story typically follows a standard everyman protagonist who lacks ambitions but isn't a bad guy, who dies very suddenly, sometimes heroically, sometimes just in an accident. Because their death is premature, instead of sending them off to the afterlife, they are reincarnated into another world where they're given another chance at life. Typically with some kind of leg up so they can be the hero that they never got to be originally. Most isekai end up in a fantasy world that runs on RPG mechanics. You know, Dungeons and Dragons, Final Fantasy sorts. The genre is incredibly popular, and it's also rife with self-parody. So much so that when Truck-kun is supporting me from another world came across my desktop as part of my Steam Next Fest coverage, I kind of rolled my eyes at it. But let me be clear, there's a strong foundation here and a pretty solid time if you have the right expectations. Truck-kun follows Sarissa, a corporate ladder climber that has just received a new position at her company. Things are going pretty well for Sarissa, so when she's struck by a hapless delivery driver and becomes a knight in a fantasy world, she's not super interested in continuing her journey. Instead, she contacts the delivery driver and proposes a plan to expedite her return to the normal world. By having him run down pedestrians, reincarnating them as monsters, and then fighting them, she can get strong enough to take on the villainous Skeleton King early and hopefully reincarnate back into the normal world before she has to clock in for her shift on Monday. It's a very silly, very striking little premise that gets a pretty good reaction from people whenever I describe it to them, and it seems to be what the developers are really banking on to kind of carry the momentum of the game. There's really not a whole lot to Truck-kun outside of its story, which is a shame because the actual gameplay loop is really fun. In practice, Truck-kun kind of plays like a mix of Crazy Taxi and the City Trial from Kirby's Air Ride. You're dropped into this city and given a timer, and in that time you strike civilians who are then become monsters, and then you strike random objects to power up Sarissa so she can defeat them. And the game gives you a bunch of side objectives that will extend your timer, give you additional stars. Once your run is over, the game tallies up how many stars you've collected, how many enemies you've beaten, and gives you a list of milestones to complete. These milestones are persistent between runs and can be as simple as drifting for a certain amount of distance, or as complicated as defeating a certain amount of foes. Since these milestones persist between runs, there's no real way to lose them. As long as you play the game consistently, you'll eventually do them all. But I feel I have to say a couple of times I got stuck drifting in a circle for 2 minutes because the only milestone I had left to do involved drifting for a specific distance, and it's just not something I did a whole lot of while playing the game ambiently. As much as I enjoy playing Truck-kun, it does suffer from a pretty severe lack of progression. Progression can take on a lot of forms in games. Most modern games have upgrade systems that kind of incentivize you to play more, to accumulate more experience, to strengthen the attributes of your characters. And you might figure that would play into the RPG aspect with Sarissa, but it doesn't really come up at all. That's fine as far as I'm concerned, but the other issue is there's no progression in skill level. Part of that is because Truck-kun's systems don't really interact very much. You don't actually have to defeat any of the enemies to complete a run in Truck-kun. You don't need stars until a milestone unlocks that tells you that you should do this. There's not really any benefit to doing so, other than it's a mechanic in the game. I think the problem here is that Truck-kun doesn't have any sort of score system. it doesn't have a style meter or a combo meter or just a basic number that it attaches to you at the end of your run to tell you how good you've done. The closest is the amount of stars you have and the amount of enemies you defeat. But these don't feel like numbers that you can meaningfully impact by playing the game better, because there's enough of a random element to your side objectives that it kind of just happens. What I mean by this is, imagine a game like a Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, which is a sort of indie sports title. On that game, you accumulate score by doing tricks. You also get a multiplier every time you take a corner while grinding on a rail. In practice, you want to grind rails constantly and collect as many corners as you can to get your multiplier up as high as possible. That's the actual high-end goal of the game, and most of the game is about getting the skills to do that long-term. To do it, to grind for longer and to connect rails that are far enough apart that normally they would require you to drop your combo. That's where the real genius and fun of a game like that comes in. Truck-kun doesn't really have that. You can really beat the game just through brute force if you were inclined to, which kind of makes it feel a little simplistic. The fact that Truck-kun is an arcadey title might cause some people to roll their eyes. Why does a game that's designed for individual score runs and everything, why does a game like this need to have any of that stuff? Isn't just playing it enough? But I do think we underestimate the importance of these systems. A lot of people don't play games for score, but score does actually have a meaningful impact on continuing to play a game and incentivizing better play. Take Pac-Man, for example. When you first play Pac-Man, your goal isn't to get a high score, it's to clear the maze without getting a game over. But once you've done that, your next incentive becomes maybe completing the maze without losing a life. Then it becomes, well, how many mazes can I beat before a game over? Then how many can I beat before I lose a life? Then it might become, well, can I beat my buddy? Can I beat the other people in the bar where the arcade cabinet is? That's where a score comes in. Because the difference there isn't simply clearing mazes. It's not simply playing the game more than anyone else. It's playing better. It's tricking the ghost and taking them all out at once. It is incentivizing skillful play, not just abundance of play. Truck-kun lacks this, and I think it really suffers from it. I would love to have some sort of number that I can look at the end of my run and decide, I bet I can beat that if I play a little bit better the next time. The closest the game offers is the stars and the enemies that are defeated, but it feels a little too distant. It doesn't really feel like you can massively impact those numbers through skillful play, through maximizing efficiency, because so much of it feels random. Sometimes you get a bunch of side objectives that take a lot of time, and sometimes you get 2 or 3 side objectives you can complete all at once. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. Sometimes the game decides you need to go to the opposite side of the map to do an objective. It might only give you time instead of stars. I think if Truck-kun offered some more traditional progression, I could maybe look the other way on some of this stuff and praise it as a single-player experience, but it doesn't have really anything for that either. There's no other maps. There's no other real events to it. There's a sort of final boss, but it's pretty close to what you're doing the rest of the time anyway. All Truck-kun really has to incentivize you to play more is its story, which is alright, but is maybe a little more saccharine than I kind of wanted it to be. For a game with such a goofy, high-concept premise, it really doesn't feel like it makes good on it. Out of curiosity, I decided to see how much of a new file I could play before the game actually forced me to use the combat mechanics, and the answer was not crazy far, but I was able to complete a half dozen runs no problem. Try completing a maze in Pac-Man without using the power pellets. It's practically impossible. despite all these complaints, I have come back to Truck-kun a handful of times past my review embargo just to kind of fiddle around with it. It's smooth to play. It's enjoyable to play. I just think it needs a little more to push it over the edge. Whether that's just different maps to add some diversity, or a combo meter, or a style meter, or a basic score and leaderboard system so that way you can compete with your friends. Any one of those things would do so much to making continuous play of Truck-kun all the better. So much of what made arcade games fun was trying to beat other people, whether that was the ghosts of their scores on the leaderboards or playing against them on the same cabinet. In the asocial modern world of games and entertainment, trying to recapture that requires a lot more investment and time from developers, and Truck-kun just doesn't have any of it, I'm afraid. On my completed save file, Truck-kun proudly displays that I have some 1,400 stars total. I suppose I could show that to a friend who's played Truck-kun and see if they can try and beat it, but that would just require them to play a lot of the game. It wouldn't require them to be better at the game than me. And I guess that's really the issue here, is Truck-kun is fun, but it just doesn't quite give me enough ways to get better at it. And I think that's fundamental to an arcadey type of game. Despite these misgivings, Truck-kun's smooth gameplay and tight controls earn it a 7 out of 10.